Hey folks, wanted to jump on and just say welcome and thank you for joining us. We are at the top of the hour, but know that people might be getting oriented to the tech and logging on. So we are going to give it just a couple of minutes to make sure that everybody can get into the meeting and get settled. And we'll get started here in about 2 minutes. Thanks for hanging tight. We are a few minutes past the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for taking the time this afternoon to join us for this really exciting meeting, really important meeting as we get into starting to think about and talk about visitor access management planning for Yosemite National Park. My name is Rachel. I'm just going to do a couple logistics as a meeting facilitator here at the top of the meeting, and then we'll jump right in. For folks who haven't been into a Teams Live environment before, welcome to Teams Live and to these meetings. We are going to be doing a Q&A here at the meeting. We're going to start by sharing some information in the presentation and then getting to the Q&A. So you have a Q&A button in your screen. It's up at the top there, kind of showing where the red arrow is pointing to. If you have questions, as we go throughout the meeting, feel free to open up that Q&A box, drop it right in there. We're going to be collecting questions throughout the meeting and kind of organizing them by topic and getting them sorted in the background. So feel free to drop a question in anytime, but we'll start responding to those once we get through the presentation and be collecting them up. One other thing I wanted to show folks before we get going. If you are looking for sound, the little sound button is down on the bottom, so you might need to pop the volume up to hear us a little bit better. We'll do our best to project. And if you're looking for closed captioning, there is the closed caption button down there in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And there's captions available in a couple different languages if that's a service that's helpful for you for following along with this meeting. Also did want to note for folks that this meeting is being recorded, and we will be posting the recording once we are able to kind of get it cleaned up and get the closed captioning cleaned up and posting that onto the project website. So if you want to go back to anything or re-listen to a section of it, that recording will be up in just a few days, and you're welcome to go to the recording to catch up on a section of the meeting that you might have missed or to revisit any of the content that you might not have heard. So now with those logistics out of the way, I'm going to invite our superintendent, Cicely Muldoon, to jump on and give us a welcome and a little bit of an orientation to what we're here to talk about tonight.
All right. Hey, thanks, Rachel, and thanks everybody for joining. I echo what Rachel said. Everybody leads busy lives, so taking the time for a public meeting, thank you for being a good citizen. Thank you for caring about Yosemite and joining us today. I just want to say a few words of introduction before I turn the presentation over to the planning team. If you're a longtime Yosemite visitor, you have seen the crowding that sometimes brings us to total gridlock in the summer months and some other times of year. And you've probably been caught in it yourself. So it's a rough time when that happens for visitor experience and for the park resources that we are trying to protect. Our real job here is to ensure that a visit to Yosemite is world-class for this world-class, amazing place that is Yosemite National Park. So we're so happy to be entering into this process to really consider how we manage for a fantastic visitor experience into the future. And what we really need is a lot of public engagement in that. So again, I appreciate you being there today. We're certainly not alone out there. We're one of many, many national parks across the system who are facing congestion issues and testing out different solutions to ensure everyone can have a good experience in the park and that we protect these places for the future, which is our fundamental job. Over the past 3 summers, we've had a chance, kind of by circumstance, really, by COVID and then by an extraordinary amount of construction to test out the reservation system over the past 3 summers. We will not have one of those this coming summer, but we will be in this planning process. We're just at the start. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for public engagement. We are really looking for your help and your ideas. You're really, by being here today, you are in on the ground floor of this planning effort. We started this in December and we expect it to last about 2 years to get from the beginning to the end to a great solution. So thanks for being involved and thanks for being here. This is your first opportunity of many for input. And if you're on this call today, you are probably a longtime Yosemite visitor who cares about this place a lot. So thank you for that too. Thanks for helping us shape Yosemite's future. So I think, Rachel, I'm going to introduce you and Kathleen and turn it back to you. So our 2 lead presenters today, Dr. Rachel Collins, who you've already met, project manager from the Denver Service Center. Rachel's working on a number of these plans throughout the national park system, so is really well connected to what's going on out there. Kathleen Morse is the division chief here at Yosemite for strategic planning and project management. Many, many years of experience at Yosemite, and she will speak to the planning effort that's going to go on around this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Rachel, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Cicely. I want to give folks a little bit of an orientation to what we have in the presentation before we start into the Q&A tonight. We are going to do some background on the planning framework and kind of what the process looks like for walking through, thinking about, and doing some problem solving related to congestion in the park and visitor access. We're going to talk a little bit about the project context, some of the background, where we're going, what the goals of the project are, how you can be engaged in this planning process, and what this current comment period looks like. So just a little bit of an orientation to what's going to be in the presentation tonight. I'm going to get us started by talking about the planning framework that we're going to be using to think about and walk ourselves through this process. So the planning framework that we use within the National Park Service is up on the screen. This is, I want to give a quick overview of our best practices related to it and kind of how it guides this process when it comes to thinking about and making decisions on visitor use management. Before I dive into some of the details on that framework, I did want to take a minute to talk about what do we mean when we say visitor use management. And that term, visitor use management, and the framework that we're applying to this process is about thinking strategically and proactively for managing all of the different characteristics of visitor use, such as types of use, levels of use, locations and timing and distribution. And it's the settings through which a variety of strategies or tools might be implemented to help sustain our goal statements, to help sustain the resources that are so important for the designation of this park. In a nutshell, this process and visitor use management is about the management of people and resources while sustaining both. This isn't easy to do. It's always changing, and it requires our constant attention, commitment, partnerships, and also innovation. We'll be talking about all of those things as we go through the presentation today. As Cicely said so well at the top of the meeting, we all want every visitor to have a world-class park experience. Being thoughtful and deliberate about how we plan for visitor use allows us to better provide a welcoming and inclusive environment for all, and be better connecting people with their natural and cultural heritage. and supporting those healthy lifestyles and time with friends and families and the economic vitality of our local communities. So it's really important to be balancing these visitor experiences with the protection of and improvement of the resources, which is why proactive and strategic visitor use planning, like we're doing in this process, is really critical to the work we do with the National Park Service. It helps us use all of the tools in our toolbox to maximize opportunities for the public to enjoy and make connections to their public lands. We're going to be seeing all of these themes come up again as we talk about project goals. And we know when we do this well, when we're really thoughtful and proactive about this process, we are really investing in high quality experiences where we're connecting people to the resources that lead to a long-term advocacy for our public lands, enhanced relationships with partners, stakeholders, and communities, and provide an opportunity for us to be implementing innovative solutions to address emerging and dynamic needs. This process is not just about prescribing one thing or one strategy to meet the variety of goals, but really coming up with that toolbox and creative space and a forum for continued dialogue and innovation. So I'm going to go back to those key framework elements and talk and unpack this circle graphic a little bit. This framework that we use within the National Park Service was actually developed by the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. So this is a framework that is shared by all 6 land management and water management agencies at the federal level. And so it's the framework we're going to be working through to address visitor use and visitor access at Yosemite. In short, this is our skeletal structure for the overall process. It's divided into 4 major elements that are the 4 colors on the screen, and they represent the most basic elements of successfully managing use and successfully walking through our decision-making process. You can see that this is broken down into a why, what, how, and do structure that should look pretty familiar. It's the same kind of structure that we see in all good planning and just in good problem solving generally. And we also represent it as a wheel because it's a process. We want to be continually learning and evolving as we go. So this is a great example of a chance for us to learn from each other, for us to learn from you. We really are engaging in this comment period and this opportunity for feedback right now because the inputs that y'all tell us during this comment period critically inform our next steps. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this comment period early, have these meetings really early in our process, so that folks have a chance to really inform those next steps. And you can see there in the middle of that graphic, the public engagement is a core part of every element and a core part of all steps in our process. So what does it look like to work through this process? It starts with this first element, build the foundation, and that's where we are right now in our process, is in this section. This is where we really try to understand what problem are we solving? Why is this project needed? What's bringing us to the table? And what's the approach? So we're thinking about getting organized and gathering the different inputs that inform this. So again, a really important part of our process right now is that we are thinking about what are the problems we could solve? What are the issues that are bringing us to the table? How might we start to think about achieving our goals when it comes to resource protection and connecting folks to quality experiences? But we also want to hear your perspectives on that. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What's interfering with your visit? That is a critical input to us right now as we build the foundations of this project and move into our next steps. From there, we'll be moving into element 2, where we're defining the direction of this project and defining the direction of access to Yosemite. So we want to be thinking about where do we want to go and how will we know when we get there. So we'll be working on things like desired conditions. And this is the heart of the process. What are we managing for and why does it matter to us? So you'll note that we have some questions about values. What brings you to Yosemite? How do you importantly connect to this space? That critically informs that next step for us. And then how will we know when we're departing from it? How will we know when we're achieving those desired conditions through our indicators and thresholds? I'll also want to note that there is a really strong portfolio. Kathleen's going to talk about this in a couple slides about work that's already been done at Yosemite on some of these steps. We're going to be pulling forward the best of the portfolio, the best of the input from everybody that we're hearing from in this steps, and really fueling that forward into what comes next for Yosemite on visitor access. The next step in the process, element 3, is how do we get there? So we really work through those 2 other elements before we even start thinking about what are the strategies we're going to need to help us get from where we are to where we want to be. And so that's when we start thinking about what are the educational strategies? Are there engineering strategies like design of the flow of visitors and enforcement strategies like permits or other things like that that help us move from where we currently are to where we want to be? How do we achieve those desired conditions as we move through this process? And then the last section of the wheel there is on implementation. And this is where we really take all of those good ideas, put them into place, start monitoring, learning, and adapting our management. And this really isn't the end of the framework or the last element, because given the dynamic nature of visitor use, of visitor connection, and of access, we are committed to continuing to learn and adapt as we use this framework to continually check in. What's working, what's not working, and how might we continue to respond to the conditions around us. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview of the process we're going to be using, some of the best practices that we're going to be using to orient folks, and where we are currently in that process to give folks an understanding of where we are now and what's coming up next. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to talk to us a little bit about the context of the project, a little bit about Yosemite for folks, and to talk a little bit about where we are on this project, where our goals are, and what our issue statements are.
Okay, great. Hey, thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone who's joined us. I wish I could see you all. Public involvement is probably my favorite part of the planning process. I really, really value it, and I'm just so excited that we have such a great turnout tonight. We're going to take that planning framework that Rachel just described, and we're going to show you how it's going to be applied in planning for visitor use at Yosemite National Park. So let's go back to element 1, like Rachel said, of the visitor use management framework, and that's building the foundation. So we start with the basics, the National Park Service mission. Our management strategies, whatever we develop in this process, is going to need to be consistent with that overarching mission for the National Park Service. This mission is grounded in the Organic Act of 1916. Specifically, the Act declares that the National Park Service has a dual mission, both to conserve park resources and provide for their use and enjoyment in such a manner and by such means that will leave them unimpaired for future generations. Planning for and managing visitor use in concert with resource protection is really at the heart of the National Park Service mission. So the Park Service mission is global. Moving to the next slide. And almost directly, and so it applies to all the national park units. But we want to focus on Yosemite now. Now, I know everyone, many of you, most of you probably are really familiar with the park, but this is just to remind us that we're talking about this very special place. It's a huge park. It's located in California, almost directly across from San Francisco, adjacent to the Sierra Nevada mountain range. The park is 760,000 acres in size, about the size of Rhode Island, but around 90% of the park is actually wilderness. Most of the 4 to 5 million visitors we receive each year will only see areas of the park that are accessible by road, and much of that can only be accessed in the summer months. This makes visitor use management challenging, as visitation patterns throughout the park will vary in relation to weather conditions and travel time from our 4 entrance stations. Regardless, roughly 80% of all park visitors will find themselves in the heart of the park, which is Yosemite Valley. So this planning effort, it's important to understand, really has a whole park focus on how to manage day use access to the park itself. It is complex in that our developed areas are separated by large expanses of wilderness. They also have widely varying characteristics and levels of infrastructure improvements. Some areas already have visitor capacities developed in prior planning efforts, while others have yet to be defined. All of this will be considered as the planning effort moves forward. The bottom line that everyone should understand is that this is the first park-wide planning effort Yosemite has conducted in decades. It will set the course for park management and visitor experience for generations. Therefore, it is just so important that we hear from you throughout this course of this project and that we work together as we move forward. Every unit of the National Park System has a foundational document to provide basic guidance for planning and management decisions. The core components of a foundation document include a brief description of the park purpose, its significant statements, fundamental resources and values, and interpretive themes. These components are core because they typically do not change over time. Core components are expected to be used in future planning and management efforts. The core components can be thought of as the guiding principles for policy development and management action, exactly what we're doing through this planning process. While there are many ways to manage a park, all management actions must be directed at protecting and sustaining the values that are outlined in the park's enabling legislation and summarized in the park's foundation document. Here we see the park purpose statement from the foundation document that was completed for Yosemite in 2016. This gives us a starting point for element 1 of the planning framework, establishing the foundation for this planning effort. So the purpose of Yosemite National Park is to preserve the dynamic setting within the park's boundaries, including soaring granite domes, dramatic cliffs, towering waterfalls, ancient sequoia groves, expansive wilderness terrain, and free-flowing wild and scenic rivers, to celebrate the cultural and historic traditions of the Central Sierra Nevada, including thousands of years of human history, to perpetuate the American conservation ethic, and to provide opportunities for scientific exploration, recreation, education, and inspiration for generations to come. So that's the purpose of the park, and I'm sure each of you have seen yourselves in one or many of those elements that are considered important and valuable in establishing this park. So when we start into planning and decision-making processes, we need to start by asking the question, what are we managing for? The answer to that question helps drive our vision and goals for the future and frames our objectives. So why is Yosemite a national park? We can look to the significant statements for the answer. Significant statements express why a park's resource and values are important enough to merit designation at the time as a unit of the national park system. Statements of significance describe the distinctive nature of the park and why an area is important within a global, national, regional, and system-wide context. They focus on the most important resources and values that must be addressed in park planning and management. Yosemite has 15 significant statements, acknowledging the importance of the park's outstanding scenery, contiguous wilderness, ancestral homelands for several tribes and groups, alpine lakes and meadows, wild and scenic rivers, and many other unique and valuable attributes. So what do we need to protect to maintain the park's significance and realize its purpose? That's the fundamental resources and values. These are those features, systems, processes, experiences, stories, scenes, sounds, smells, or other attributes that are determined to warrant primary consideration during planning and management processes because they're essential to achieving the purpose of the park and maintaining its significance. For Yosemite, 10 fundamental resources and values have been identified in the foundation document. They are 1, unique geological landscapes, 2, dramatic inspirational scenery, 3, abundance and quality of water resources, 4 are giant sequoias, 5, vast ecological diversity, 6, enduring human connections, 7, diverse recreational experiences, 8, educational opportunities, and 9, global leadership and conservation. If you want to dig deeper and get a better understanding of this foundational material, please see our story map that will be provided in the link in the chat here. We'll send that link in the Q&A box. The complete foundational document is posted to the park's website and easily accessible for you to look at in more detail. So now to drill down into what we're striving to accomplish with this planning effort. This is a visitor access management plan for the park to develop a strategy for managing visitor use in the long haul in order to protect all the fundamental values I just described, while also delivering on the Park Service mission to provide for the use and enjoyment of the park. In short, the plan strives for balance. In moving forward with the planning process, our goal is to incorporate and build from the extensive planning the park has already completed and to commit to transparent and comprehensive public involvement and outreach. Given the critical importance of this work to the future of the park and our visitors, we ask that you help us by engaging with this effort, reviewing the materials provided, and taking the time to provide your feedback, insights, and suggestions as we move through each stage of the plan development over the next several months. We just went over the fundamental pieces of our work, the big picture goals. Let's step it down now to the specific objectives for this plan. We're taking a hard look at our visitation patterns, really focusing on the day user, the folks that are staying at our gateways or driving in from other areas of the state. How many are visiting? When do they come? How long do they stay? And where do they go? We're also looking at the issues associated with current patterns of visitor use. and how those really prevent our visitors from fully enjoying the park and experiencing all of those wonderful fundamental resource values we've just discussed. How can we do a better job managing visitation so that we can connect visitors to the park experience and more effectively maintain what the values that they come to see? While there are many issues to explore, there are also many strategies that can be employed to address them. As Rachel likes to say, and she already did, there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, and we're aiming to develop a strategy that works best for Yosemite and its unique setting. Actions that address one issue may prevent us from successfully dealing with others. So we have to look at this comprehensively and get everything out on the table so we can deal with it as a systems problem instead of taking one thing at a time. It's complex for sure, but we have a good start in understanding how the park and visitors interact because of all of our prior planning efforts, so we're off to a good start. And speaking of past efforts, here we go. The park has been chipping away at visitor use management for decades. It's not as if we haven't known there was a problem. In fact, back in the 1970s, the Wilderness Trailhead Quota System was established, and it continues to set limits on wilderness visitation to protect wilderness character and provide a true wilderness experience for the visitor. In short, better connecting visitors to that fundamental value. The 1980 GMP listed capacities for several developed areas in the park. These were largely viewed as informative and not really a regulatory decision. The Mariposa Grove Plan in 2013 established a fixed number of parking spaces and bus reservations to hold visitation to the Grove at a manageable level. The most direct and explicit development of user capacities occurred in the Merced and Tuolumne River plans that were completed in 2014, where people at one-time limits were placed on areas in the vicinity of these wild and scenic rivers. Yosemite Valley, Tuolumne Meadows, and Wawona are among the developed areas in the park for which these user capacities were developed. In about 2016, the park made a concerted effort to try different approaches to manage some of the use in Yosemite Valley. We tried special event ticketing for the Horsetail Fall event, reserving a day-use parking lot for weekends, and a bypass route at El Portal to get employees to the valley while avoiding traffic queues. All of these attempts just led us to better understand that the problem needed to be fixed at a park-wide level. When the pandemic hit in 2020 and the park shut down, our goal was to get the park open as quickly as possible while protecting public health and adhering to CDC guidelines. We implemented a pilot vehicle reservation program to achieve those goals. Once the park was open, the goal was to keep it open. So in 2021, we again instituted a day-use vehicle reservation program that was flexible enough to address developments in the pandemic. In 2022, we adopted a peak hours reservation program to account for the intensity of construction going on in the park and the many popular areas that were closed because of it. Finally, in both 2021 and 22, we tested a traffic improvement pilot, redesigning traffic flow on the basis of analytical modeling completed by the Federal Highways Administration. This year, we're moving forward with the permanent installation of those improvements. So it's important to note that every year of our pilot programs and throughout our planning processes, we have been collecting data to understand how the system works, how visitors are responding to it, and how it can be modified and improved for the next year. All of this learning will feed into this current planning effort and represents a significant investment in our planning foundation. So from the work the park has done over the years and initial discussions we've had to start this planning process, which is on the next slide, we've identified several issues to be addressed as we start thinking about the best strategies for managing visitor use. The key issues we've identified are crowding on roads and parking lots from vehicle overload at peak times, impacts the quality of the visitor experience when folks can't find parking, are stuck in traffic jams, are fighting their way up overcrowded trails or to overloaded viewing points, challenges in protecting natural and cultural resources due to overuse, misdirected foot travel, and overloaded facilities. So this is the list that we've developed, but we want to hear from you, our visitors, our stakeholders, our partners, and our friends. What are you seeing and where are your concerns? So I'm going to pass this back to Rachel so she can outline the next steps in our process and how you can become involved. Thank you for listening.
Great, so let's take a look at the planning process and kind of what our next steps look like in a little bit more detail. So we have a couple different project phases lined up as far as how we're going to take that framework I talked about at the top of the meeting and contextualize it for this specific process that Kathleen talked about. So we are in the first phase of this project right now, where we're really focusing on foundations and problem analysis. So we're working on the purpose and the need for the project, key issues, as Kathleen talked about, looking at project objectives and reviewing data and previous studies, and where that purple button is, exploring and engaging with our stakeholders and with the general public about what's your view of the problems and what could we be working on and what does a quality experience look like to you, and asking some of those key questions. From there, we're going to take all of those inputs, what we hear from you, what we've been working on and the previous planning looks like, and move into exploring solutions in phase 2. And this is where we'll start to look at what could we be doing, what should we be doing to move us from where we are to where we want to be on our goals and desired conditions. We'll be assembling those ideas into concepts and strategies, and eventually moving towards preliminary alternatives. We'll have a chance for folks to take a look at and review some of those preliminary strategies and ideas that we're considering for analysis. And so that's where we'll be engaging stakeholders again, and our public again to take a look at that content before we move into this decision-making phase toward the end of phase 3, where we're confirming strategies, developing a draft plan, heading into any related compliance or consultation needs, and folks will have a chance to review that draft plan and any associated compliance document before we make any final decisions. So let's talk a little bit more about how you can be involved and what your role is in this planning process, especially with the public comment period that we're in right now. We genuinely do want to hear from you, and that's part of creating these opportunities. These are the 5 questions that are loaded onto parkplanning.nps.gov, and the link is there on the screen. We'll also post it through as an announcement in the Q&A pod so folks can have it. It's also open up on social media and a couple other different places as you can find it, but we really want to hear from you about what experiences in Yosemite are most important to you. That's going to critically inform how we work on desired conditions and our goals. We want to know what the best parts of your experience are and what are the worst parts. We want to know if anything's going really well for you, that help us address crowding and congestion. We also want to know what barriers get in the way of you enjoying your visit to Yosemite National Park and any other thoughts you have to share with us. So we'd really encourage folks to spend some time with these questions, take them for a walk, have coffee with them, and then we do want to hear from you about where you are on this. And the best way to do that is by providing your thoughts and responses into that parkplanning.nps.gov portal. So between now and February 3rd, we're inviting folks to participate in this process. We're going to be gathering all this information up and sharing it. And so we really want to hear all that feedback, and there's that URL again for folks to provide that feedback to us. I do want to say that providing input and thoughts in your comments takes time, and we respect that. So just do know that when it comes over to us, there is a human, probably someone that you're hearing from tonight, who is reading those letters, who takes it into the analysis. We don't have any fancy AI that does our comment analysis. It's humans and planners and us who read through that and distill it and take every comment to heart. Every good idea gets its day in the sun. Every letter gets a consideration. So the time that you're putting into putting letters together, we're putting into reading it and incorporating into our process. So with that, that gets us to the end of the presentation section of our meeting tonight. I have been running the presentation, but also watching the Q&A and seeing a lot of questions come in. So we are getting those kind of pulled together and sorted by topics. We can kind of take them in chunks. We have a bunch of people on this meeting and a lot of questions coming in. So we're going to take a quick 2 minutes to make sure we've got all the questions organized and got all the biggest topics, because what we're going to do is try to answer the questions we have kind of the most curiosity about. There's a couple questions on themes. We want to make sure we hit those that, you know, where the biggest pockets of curiosity are for folks. I know that there's also probably some questions that may or may not be related to our meeting topic tonight. So we're going to focus on the questions most connected to the visitor access management planning and get to those first. and we'll get through as many of them as we can. So if you were looking for an opportunity to quick grab another serving of dinner if you're having dinner with us, or grab another drink, go ahead and do that. We'll take a quick 2 minutes to get the questions sorted and be right back to jump into the Q&A. Okie doke, let's go ahead and get into the Q&A section for tonight. We've got a great list of questions, super thoughtful. Appreciate folks getting these in here. First question is for you, Cicely. Folks are curious if we're considering not implementing a reservation system in the long term. Thoughts about where we are on thinking about reservation systems. Is that a foregone conclusion, or how does it fit into our larger evaluation process?
That is a great question. The answer is yes. We're considering every single, every range of alternatives that comes out of this planning process. So I think that'll be everything from different reservation systems to no reservation systems to other types of management of visitors coming to Yosemite. There's already a lot of great ideas are coming through on the chat. We don't have the answers to this one yet. This is why we're doing this planning process to get the best solutions we can at the other end of this. So we have a long-term fix that is good for everyone visiting Yosemite.
Great, thanks. And Cicely, don't go too far. I have one more for you. We had a question about what type of enforcement is the park planning to implement to support visitor use strategies that are put into place?
Another great question. I don't really know the answer to that one yet. It all depends on what comes out on the other end of this process. We will absolutely adapt our operations to reflect the outcome of this planning process to make it work, to make whatever solutions come out of this work well for visitors.
Great, thank you. Laurel is going to be joining us. And Laurel, when you pop on, if you could do a brief introduction of yourself. But after you introduce yourself, if you could answer this question for us. What is the Park Service doing about commercial allocations for our reservation systems to ensure that there's enough reservations for everybody?
Hi, sure thing. My name is Laurel Wynn, and I'm currently acting as the Division Chief for Business and Revenue Management at the park. So I think this question is speaking to kind of commercial entities trying to snap up reservations as soon as they become available. And the park has actually already explored a number of avenues to try to address this, from working with recreation.gov to limit the number of reservations that can be made with a single account, to actually pursuing law enforcement cases if the activity rises to a level that merits legal action. And I think we will also want to continue to consider these types of issues as we develop and weigh long-term solutions.
Great, thank you for that. And don't go too far, Laurel. I do have one more for you. There's a question about what is the park doing to make sure that our concessionaires are meeting their kind of obligations and helping to support our operations. So questions about things like running shuttles on time, and making sure that we're able to kind of provide the kind of support that folks are expecting when they're coming to the parks. So kind of a long question, so summarize it a little bit.
Yeah, there are a lot of different aspects to this question. I saw, the park does have a great team that works closely with Yosemite Hospitality to oversee the important services that they provide. And adjustments to the shuttle services have actually been made as a part of the ongoing traffic pilot, and I think further changes could absolutely be considered through this planning process. In terms of the different Aramark operations, there are certain aspects such as, layoffs that would be an internal business decision by them, but others, like the closures of some of these facilities, are approved by the park for needed facility improvement projects.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I'm gonna flip back over to Kathleen. Kathleen, we've got a question for you about traffic patterns. For the last 2 summers, a new traffic pattern's been in place to help alleviate congestion. So what are we learning through that traffic pattern? Is there a consideration we might keep it permanent? And are any kinds of oversized vehicles having challenges with navigating it?
Yeah, thanks. So yes, the traffic pilot circulation program, we're calling it a pilot, but actually we've been implementing it for 2 years now on a pretty sustained basis. We have been working very closely with Federal Highways. They have a very sophisticated modeling team. They do all kinds of transportation studies and analyses across the country and for other parks. So what we found with this pilot is that it really dramatically increased our ability to move cars through Yosemite Valley. And so it was of great benefit. We have documented results from that were done by our analytical folks that basically set it in motion. So it's based on a model. The model proved to be accurate. And so we've seen great value in going ahead and making that permanent. So you'll be seeing that happening this summer. Now, one of the things that we do acknowledge is we have had some difficulties with the larger vehicles. The turning radiuses are designed to accommodate things like our tour buses and the Green Dragon tours. So it's a little mystery to me why we're having those types of problems. But my guess is that it's because it's been implemented on a temporary basis, and that's not nearly as robust or tight, as you might say, for the permanent construction. So I think you'll be seeing some improvements in navigation just from a physical standpoint through that traffic circulation program as it gets implemented. I think we'll tighten up some of those issues that may have been happening because of some of the looseness of just what we had to work with the temporary structures. So yes, it's going forward. Yes, we saw great benefits that we've documented, and I feel confident that it will be much smoother in operation once it's permanently installed.
Okay, thanks. And don't go too far. I've got one more for you. Last summer, when we had the peak hours reservation system, we allowed people to enter after 4 p.m. without a reservation. So curious, what did that mean for inbound traffic? What did we observe as a part of that? Did we learn anything from it as far as queues at the gates or patterns inside the park? Kind of, what did we learn from having no reservations after 4?
Yeah, we got a great response to that peak hour approach. Again, that was one of the options that are out there among the many toolboxes that we have at our disposal. But learning about that one in particular gave us some knowledge that we could take forward in this planning effort. What we found is that folks liked the peak hour reservation because it gave them a chance to get to the park. Even if they couldn't come in exactly when they wanted to, they still could get into the park. So that was the benefit of it. We also were able to, as I said, we've learned a lot from modeling, every step of the way. We were able to project what we thought we might see with the peak hours reservation in terms of spikes before the reservation period kicked in and spikes afterward. And yes, those spikes were realized, not necessarily to the extent that we expected them to be, but we did have 3 distinct spikes in visitation throughout the day. One prior to the reservation kicking in before 6. Then we had a more moderate spike in the middle of the day, which typically you would see that being the single spike. Folks all come in at the same time, they all leave at the same time. That's part of our problem. So by using the peak hour reservation, we were able to take the top off that peak period and moderate some of the activity during that period. So that was a benefit that we saw as well. One of the things we've learned that we need to get our arms around is how we staff up for those pre-reservation periods and post-reservation periods so that we can better manage the traffic flow at those times and have our gates fully staffed and collecting, fee dollars and interacting with the public. We ran into some staffing issues on that end of the spectrum, but again, it's been a learning process, and we learned both things that worked well and things that we would need to improve if we took that into the future.
Thanks, Kathleen. And I'm going to ask you to hang for one more because I think it's connected to your last response. But speaking of data collection and kind of observations, will any of the pre-pandemic data be used to inform this process? And I might even hazard to expand the question a little bit about what about the summer's observations? So how are we kind of thinking about all of our observations as a part of our learning? And I think you already touched on it, so I just want to give you a chance to expand about beyond just last summer to the general observations from before pandemic and current.
Yeah, we're very cognizant that the pandemic years were an anomaly, like everyone would, would realize, obviously. Now, we did learn a lot about responses to different approaches, like I just mentioned, different strategies. We did learn how visitors will respond to the various types of strategies that we put in place, but we do know that our visitations were much lower, visitation levels were much lower. So what we've been doing is we've been looking at the 2019 data and data prior to the pandemic, understanding kind of what the flow is that we would see in a normal year, moving that forward into what we expect to see this summer. So this summer will really be an important time period to collect some baseline information. What really happens when we have the traffic pilot in place, so to speak, so we're improving traffic flow, but we're seeing much higher visitation than we've seen over the last couple of years. So the short answer is we take all of that into consideration, and we completely understand that we've been through a couple of years of very different visitation patterns. But the last thing I want to say also is that as this has been going on, as the pandemic has been playing itself out, as we've been testing different strategies for use, we've also been making significant investments in our infrastructure. So not only will you see the traffic circulation pilot being unveiled, but you'll also see new parking areas in the valley that have been improved and paved. So we have more orderly parking opportunities. We've done a lot of work to better connect visitors to where they need to go without them having to drive all over the place and get to where they need to go. So those things, in conjunction with the traffic pilot, in conjunction with not having a reservation system this summer, will really give us some great information and understanding about what the problems really are today, contemporary problems versus looking too far in the past. And that's what we're excited to learn this summer, and also looking to see what your opinions and evaluations are of what we put in place.
Great, thank you so much. I'm gonna think this next one would be a great one for Cicely. So Cicely, there's a question about how we'll maintain equal access to those who might not have a computer or knowledge of how to access a quote unquote system. If we decide a reservation system is a good solution in the long term, how are we going to be thinking about equal access and equity considerations?
That is, I'm really glad somebody asked that. That's a great question. Equal access and making whatever comes out at the other end of this, making it equitable and accessible to all is really super important to us. It's a core value. So that's going to be a strong consideration in whatever, if anything, the long-term solutions to managing access in Yosemite are. I don't have the answers to it yet, but that is a strong factor in our analysis of all the ideas that will come out of this. Super important. We, during the previous reservation systems, we had the help of our Yosemite Conservancy partners to build a better system to reaching out to the Spanish-speaking community. But, you know, Yosemite, everybody comes to Yosemite, people from all different kinds of backgrounds. So we need to find a way in this national park and all national parks to be super accessible that everybody wants to come enjoy it.
Okay, great. And one more for you, Cicely, because I think it's connected, or we'll stay on the same topic for a minute. Are efforts being made specifically to reach out to our Indigenous communities and tribally affiliated communities for their input?
Yeah, absolutely. We've reached out specifically to all the affiliated tribes at Yosemite, and it's an ongoing conversation. They're quite interested in this process.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump back over. I think Kathleen would be a good one for this next question about lotteries. Have we put any thought into using rolling lotteries for all reservable services at Yosemite, such as cars and campgrounds and day use? How that might interface with wilderness permits and half-dome permits? There's just some thoughts about, you know, the lottery versus the early reservations, if we've done any thinking about that or might do any thinking about it in the future.
Yeah, I think that in answer to that question, you know, that's thinking pretty far down the line. Right now, remember, if we think about what we just talked about, which is basically what is it we're trying to solve for? What are the issues that we're seeing, and what are the things we want to protect? And, you know, what are our sideboards, which I would also call some of the constraints, making sure that our fundamental resources and values are protected. What mechanisms we use to implement the decision of the strategy that we come up with will come later down the line once we have that strategy in place. So those are great questions, and that's a lot of detail. We're not even close to the point where we can answer those types of things, because first we have to start with what is it we're trying to protect and what strategies do we think will do that best? And then we talk about things like implementation. Another topic along those same lines would be things like infrastructure improvements, technology improvements. What if we could be scanning at the gates? We've talked about many of those types of things. Those, again, are implementation pieces that will have to go piggyback on the decision that we make for the strategy. And then it comes down to how do you smartly implement that?
Great, thanks. And I think that this is a related question about potentially a third category of quotas for wilderness permits and car campgrounds that opens a month in advance. I think we were doing previously like a long release and then like a couple days before, but could there be a third quota that's put in there? I'm skimming for some related questions because we have so many. Or other kind of 5 month out in advance reservations. I think you kind of touched on this, of like there's some implementation level details, but do you have any additional thoughts on the timing piece?
The timing piece, being when the
like how far in advance reservations would be available if we decide that that's a solution that's going to work long term.
No, because we haven't even gone to the point where we're saying reservations is the answer. We're still back trying to figure out what the best strategy is. It may be reservations, it may not be. It may be reservations during part of the year, it may not be. See, these all are things that need to be decided first before we really get down into the weeds and start talking about the things that, you know, how it actually plays itself out in reality in real time. And those are very important pieces. That's a heavy lift. So let's start with this heavy lift, and then we can get to that one and sort those pieces out.
Great, thanks for that. Let's jump over to Scott. Scott, we have a question about kind of gateway communities and how that kind of interfaces with this project. So how do we factor in the input from the gateway communities generally? And then I've got some follow-up questions for you on that topic.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, we work very closely with our gateway communities. As many folks know, a lot of the gateways that surround us, Oakhurst, Mariposa, Sonora, so many more, are integral to the visitor experience. These gateway communities depend on tourism. Tourism is their biggest industry, and so it's really their lifeblood. And so we really form this partnership with them. And our idea, as many folks know, is to educate the visitors as much as they can before they get to the park. So this is a multi-step process. So for example, we love people to look at the website, learn about it, make any reservations that they need to, half-dome permits, wilderness permits, anything like that. And then when they get to the gateways, it's the visitor centers and the people on the gateways that are really the people that are on the ground, and they're the people that can tell their hotel guests, for example, when's the best time to come to the park, what to see, those kind of things. And so at this stage in the game, as Rachel and Cicely and others have said, we're trying to get as much input as we can from everybody. We want a huge swath. The gateway partners are an important stakeholder. We've got a lot more, and no stakeholders are more important than the others, but the gateways play a real integral role. We have a really good relationship, and we're going to strengthen that, and they're going to be with us every step of the way, and we're really excited about it.
So follow-up question to that one, Scott, was we talked a little bit about, how there's a tourism component to these communities. And we've all kind of seen this evolve into an experience economy, especially around our national parks. So how does the park weigh the interests of the role and value of county tourism and community businesses with our regulatory mandates of safeguarding visitor experiences and protecting those fundamental resources and values?
That's a great question, and thank you for submitting it. And of course, as people know, our primary mission here is to preserve and protect Yosemite, as we mentioned. But the gateways, as I mentioned, are critically important part of that. And so a good example is during the reservation systems we had in 20 and 21 due to the pandemic, and this past year due to the construction, we were in constant contact with the gateway communities because, again, they're the ones that see the visitors before we do. And we made adjustments. We made adjustments as to how long a pass was good for, the number of passes available, the time. We were able to look at visitation patterns that Kathleen mentioned. And so in a lot of ways, the gateways are eyes and ears outside of the park. And so we want to factor in what they're hearing from their visitors and also their interests and make that a part of the plan, but at the same time knowing that preserving and protecting the park and providing a world-class visitor experience and a safe visit are really our objectives, and that's what drives everything. And we're going to continue to engage with the gateways and everybody else to achieve those goals.
Okay, and one more while I have you.
Sure.
Someone's curious, how did I end up on this mailing list? I got an email about this meeting, which they're grateful that they got an email about this meeting. But going forward, how do people stay involved with this process? How do they stay connected? How do they hear about upcoming opportunities?
Great question. I'm thrilled that we have almost 200 people on, and we have the planning mailing list that a lot of the folks on got this. We had a Yosemite Gateway Partners meeting that got a lot of folks, a lot of stuff on our website. So as we mentioned, we're going to put the Pepsi site onto the chat, and you can stay engaged that way. In the website, we do social media posts, we're doing news releases, and so we're going to do the best we can to get everybody engaged. But please, tell your friends, tell anyone who's interested. This is really the ground floor of a historic process, and so we want to include everybody that we can. And again, that the Pepsi site that we mentioned is the best place for the announcements for upcoming meetings, public comment periods, things like that. And also on the Pepsi side, I'll just put in a quick plug to look at the story map. Is just wonderful. The background, a lot of what we're doing, really explore that stuff because I think it's going to inform people, even for someone like me that's worked here for a long time. Reading those materials really helped me kind of ground me where we are. So please do your research, and we love your continued involvement. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna keep looping through. This is such great stuff. Our list of questions. Cicely, I'm gonna toss this one over to you. We had a question about what type of leave no trace education is being planned to help visitors reduce their impact on the park.
Leave no trace is, thanks for asking that. That's a really important component of our backcountry wilderness education system. We provide a lot of information on that with every backcountry permit that goes out there. It's a great question related to front country use that I don't fully know the answer to, but I'll raise that with our interpretive staff. It is really fundamental. There have been some questions coming in about, you know, we don't have enough facilities out there to take care of people's needs when they're stuck in traffic, and boy, don't we know it. I'm hopeful that this process we're going through is going to help us figure out what and where we need different things to have a better time visiting Yosemite, because it can be rotten to be stuck in traffic. It can be really rotten to be stuck in traffic when there aren't any facilities available when you need them.
Okay, great, thanks. And one more for you, Cicely. I know that this question was going to come up, and it did. There's some both comments and questions folks have about the peak hours reservation system or the ticket to entry seem to be working really well for some folks. Why was it stopped? Why are we not implementing that in 2023? Can you refresh us? I know you've mentioned this before, but I think
great question. No, it was not. It was not a decision made lightly. I can tell you that. Kathleen mentioned a number of improvements that have happened over the past couple of years to the circulation pattern in the valley, for one thing, changes to parking and circulation in other parts of the park. This is going to be kind of our no action alternative year in 2023. How did those improvements we've made that came out of the Merced River Plan, largely in Tuolumne River Plan, how do they serve to handle our visitation? We're worried about it. I'll tell you, we're going to do our best to really staff up for this and to bring on the parking staff, traffic staff you might remember from previous years. We're hoping we can bring on enough folks to really help it. But we're going to see what happens this summer with this. We also, I'll say one more thing about that. Actually, yeah. We the first 2 years of our reservation system were really based on the COVID pandemic. And last summer we felt we had shifted a little bit beyond COVID pandemic, though of course not entirely, but vaccinations and things out there. But last year we had this extraordinary amount of construction going on the park that was really affecting people's ability to park. We lost many hundreds of parking spaces temporarily while we were going through this. So now we're coming into a year that is kind of beyond those short-term emergency considerations. And that's exactly why we're doing this planning process right now, to really look at this issue that has vexed Yosemite really for decades, and how do we get through to a better way of operating. Okay, great, thanks. There's a couple questions related to infrastructure and what might we be considering, and related to those topics. So I'm going to ask Kathleen to take the first one. Are there any proposed solutions other than building more infrastructure for dealing with visitor-created parking due to high visitation that then begets social trailing and visitor impacts to the resources? What might we be considering on that topic?
Yeah, I would say that that's really part of what this plan is trying to figure out. You will know that most of our developed areas in the park have already completed plans, some fairly recently, like the Merced River Plan and the Tuolumne River Plan. So those plans really limit further infrastructure development. And so at least the bottom line is that we realize that we can't build our way out of a lot of these issues and problems. Adding more infrastructure isn't really an answer. It's more about figuring out how to temper the rate and pace of visitation to where it flows and it's consistent with the infrastructure that's provided while protecting all the values that we need to protect. So I don't think massive infrastructure is in the cards for a solution here. We've pretty much already crossed that path and done our best work in figuring out what the best infrastructure is for the park. Now we need to find a way to manage to it.
Okay, great, thanks. Laurel, we had a couple questions about entrance stations that I'm hoping you can help us with. So, well, one specific to entrance stations is, why don't we have a dedicated lane at the entrance stations for annual pass holders?
Yeah, and I think to Kathleen's point earlier, this is, one of many different potential solutions that we could explore as a part of this planning process. I think, we want to hear about different ideas like this and be able to weigh them against the goals that we're trying to achieve and those desired conditions to determine which ones are going to really get us the best results with the most benefits relative to cost. And so I think definitely things that we want to be able to consider, and now is the time.
Great. And one more for you. There is a question about if traffic congestion is such a worry, are we working with any major mapping providers or software producers to divert some of that kind of routing for folks who don't need to go through the park or want to go through the park, away from the park? And kind of where are we on those kind of emerging technologies when it comes to route finding and traveler information?
Yeah, that has definitely been a frustration of ours as well, that we've tried to address through a couple of different means. At the gates, of course, providing travelers with that route information, alternative ways to get to where they're going if their intention is not to visit the park, and then have actually tried to do some outreach to some of those large tech companies that do develop those map applications, and unfortunately so far haven't had great success with gaining traction or finding the right points of contact. So, if anyone does have those connections, we welcome the information.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Laurel. Gonna skim through and see what else we might have ready to talk about. Looking for themes in our questions. Let's see. One of the questions that we had, and I think Kathleen, you could speak to this, given your knowledge of the planning portfolio at Yoast. We had a question about access and preservation being companions, and the idea that they're really connected. So I think there's a question about, how are we treating visitation to the high country and the valley? How are we thinking about wilderness as a component of this, and access to Yosemite Valley? There was a concern that some peak baggers had to fight for reservations for months, when there's others visiting from miles away. So how are we thinking about that kind of balance of wilderness values, preservation values, connection for multiple generations as we embark on this process?
Well, that's a large question. But I will say that absolutely, access and preservation are not opposing goals. That's exactly what it says in the Organic Act. That's part of our mission: provide access and protect resources. And we've identified very thoroughly the resources to be protected and the experiences to be protected. The challenge is in how to achieve that balance. So it's talking about balance. It's not really saying one is more important than the other. The planning process is intended to help us get there, to figure out how to achieve that balance. And I will say that, some of the examples that have been listed here, real concerns that people have, are exactly what we need to hear during this process. These are the issues that are your issues that you're bringing to our attention. So this business about, getting into the wilderness versus getting into the park, that's an issue that you should be submitting to us in writing as part of our public comment process. Those are the types of things that make this challenging, make this hard. But everyone comes from a different perspective. And so anything you can provide for us to better understand where you're coming from and what your concerns are, that will be helpful in us moving this forward to a solution in the long term.
Okay, great, thanks. Speaking of wanting to hear from a lot of folks, there's a question for Cicely, I think, about how are the needs of private stock users in the park being considered in this process?
I would just encourage any private stock user who might have submitted that question to weigh in and let us know what you think as we develop this plan. This is the time to make your voices heard about what your interests and concerns are in your visits to Yosemite.
And relatedly for you, Cicely, how are we considering employee needs as stakeholders in this process to help build a sustainable management plan? So how are we thinking about those who are working the gates and working in the park, and what does their input in this process look like?
This plan is going to be much stronger if we have really great involvement from park staff, as well as all the other stakeholders for Yosemite. Nobody really knows how things work on the ground better than those folks who are out there working on the ground. So we need to, we're hopeful that park staff really engage in this. We're going to offer a number of individual opportunities for that. And it's what will make a workable plan in the long run if we have great staff engagement. So I appreciate that question.
Great. Okay, I'm going to pick up on one on process. I haven't gotten to answer a question yet. There was a question about at what point in the planning process will we have concrete alternatives? Presumably not before February 3rd. Correct. We will not have concrete alternatives before February 3rd. And I talked about this a little bit on the schedule, so I'm not sure if this question came through before we talked about kind of our high level schedule, but we really want to be thinking about issues and values right now. What problem are we solving and what are we trying to achieve? And that's the focus of this comment period. The next one will be on strategies. And I don't know if we'll have fully baked alternatives to weigh in on that point. We may have kind of a collection of ideas so we can use y'all as a part of the process to help us round out the brainstorm. And then we'll be putting the draft plan together. And at that point, for sure, we'll have alternatives along with any related or needed analysis that goes with that alternatives out for public review. So, so like Cicely said at the top, plenty of opportunities to be engaged, but we really did want to spend the time early in the process, right here on the ground floor, thinking about, do we have a good understanding of the problem we're solving? Do we have a well-rounded understanding of it? And that's where this comment period with y'all is so critical, to make sure it's not just our perspective of what we're trying to do or what we're trying to improve, but your perspective as well. And same thing for the goals, about how are we thinking about those goal statements. So while I'm on the topic of outreach and thinking about outreach, I'm gonna ask Scott to answer this one about some related outreach, about how is the park doing outreach to urban and rural areas that are maybe further from the park, to make sure that we have input coming in from all parts of California, all parts of the country, anybody who is a current future visitor. What's our outreach look like? Can you answer that for us, Scott?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for the question. You know, we're doing the best we can to reach out to everyone and get just a wide variety of just perspectives. As we mentioned at the beginning, a lot of you are on the planning list and a lot of longtime Yosemite visitors, but we really want this plan to be reflective of everybody. We've been doing a lot of outreach to different communities, you know, for different things, for interpretive ideas, for the park, you know, for UC Merced, for example, and Merced for Every Kid in a Park program. So we're doing a lot of outreach to the communities, and through this planning process, we want to continue to do that. We're going to have a mix of public and in-person meetings. We're working on the meeting schedule, and we're going to get out as much as we can. And as we all know, we're limited, you know, in both time and staffing. But what I will do is kind of you know, put it out there that if there's any groups that you know might be interested, or anyone that we're overlooking, please let us know. I mean, this is, as Cicely mentioned, this is our opportunity. It's so great to have so many people engaged so early in the process. And so if there's a community, for example, that you think we're missing, or you want to make sure we reach out to, please let us know. We're being as proactive as we can. Yosemite Conservancy is helping us reach out as far and wide as we can. And we're just going to try to get the biggest breadth and the biggest span of comments that we can.
Great, thanks for that. Kathleen, there's a couple follow-up questions on traffic circulation, hoping you can respond to. We have one related to, you know, the whole idea was to get rid of stop signs with the new pattern. Did we see any improvements with some of the changes we've already made? And, you know, after a long time, we've seen a lot of other improvements like the Yosemite Falls crosswalk. But what are we learning from these, from the crosswalk and other traffic patterns that are going to inform kind of next steps of the process, or that we're just have seen been great wins for us?
Yeah, the traffic pilot has been pretty amazing, actually. We've been studying transportation in Yosemite for decades. We probably have 50 studies on transportation and traffic flow. In this case, we were able to actually demonstrate something on the ground that really did work. The goal was, I mean, much broader goals than stop signs. It was really overall to simplify the traffic flow, make it more intuitive. It's so confusing for visitors when they come to the park and they have multiple options and very limited time to make decisions. So we wanted to make it more intuitive. We wanted to also remove impediments to flow, like, you know, left-hand turns that cross other, you know, other streams of traffic. So getting rid of some of those left-hand turns that would cause delays at intersections. In the Lodge intersection in particular, yeah, we did look at an underpass or an overpass. Both had significant issues associated with them. Not only that, we didn't think that they were really going to solve the problem, because they would simply, you know, what we're seeing is pedestrians are crossing the road in many different places. So it's more how traffic flows in and out of the Lodge that is causing that problem, and the rate of traffic exodus from the valley. So a couple of things we did in regard to that particular intersection that we think will be more effective and less expensive than a $20 million underpass. We've actually changed the location of how people enter into the Lodge area. So it'll be before that intersection occurs. That intersection will basically go away. It'll be just a pedestrian area. And so we're entering the Lodge prior to that intersection. We're also exiting it beyond that intersection. So that flow that people needing to get into the Lodge and out of the Lodge will be corrected by better guiding traffic. It's kind of like thinking about when you go to get gas at Costco. You know, it's all one way, it flows one way, and that creates a lot less confusion than if everyone's trying to jam into the pumps from different directions. Same idea here. We're just trying to increase the flow and get folks trained that this is how you access these areas and this is how you move through them. So that will help. We think that will help a lot in that particular intersection. And the other fixes will help in moving traffic circulation throughout the entire valley. What we've learned in the traffic pilot, and what we've demonstrated in going back and looking at the time that it takes from a car to move from one point to another, is that we've greatly increased the speed, and not like crazy speed, but I mean, just we're not limping along. We're moving at a pace that is consistent with our speed limits by introducing the traffic pilot. So we've increased the speed of movement throughout the entire transportation network. We've also, by keeping the 2 lanes exiting the park at the end of the day, instead of having only 1 lane of traffic pass the Lodge, we are flushing the valley at the end of the day versus creating a traffic backup at the end of the day when everyone wants to get out. So we've increased the throughput and the exodus, which was part of the reason we were getting some of those traffic delays at the end of the day at the Lodge intersection. So it's a complicated and complex solution that we've developed, but in its implementation, it's really quite simple. And at the end of the day, it should be much more intuitive and easier for visitors to understand how to navigate the valley. And we hope and we believe that it will be a much improved situation once the pilot is in place.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on some of the process questions that have come in and that maybe are a little bit bigger. So we have seen a bunch of questions come in related to challenges with things like fees, challenges with things like timing, challenges with things like 1-day permits versus day of permits versus week-long permits, and how they relate to other activities. And do want to say that I am so grateful for these. These are exactly the kinds of conversations we want to be having right now. And I think we're seeing like, this has made it really difficult for me. That's super helpful information for us. So that's why we asked that question a couple of slides back about, you know, what are the barriers for you for achieving a great experience? Let us know what those are. And so the question was, are these concerns something that, you know, the visitor access plan is going to be thinking about? Yes, absolutely. And that's why we wanted to do this process, because we really wanted to see like what, and hear from people, what are the barriers? Why is that a barrier to you? How does it interfere with your experience? So that we have some tangible information to be working from, thinking about how we can design a system and a set of strategies going forward that work for as many people as want to be coming to the park. There also was a question about why are we looking at this at Yosemite National Park? Why aren't there reservations at places like Yellowstone or Denali were mentioned? There's we're 400 plus units, and so there's a whole mix of things. And I would say that when it comes to reservations, there are a lot of different types of systems in place. So everything from Tour of Ford's Theater is a type of reservation system, to the Denali Road Lottery is another type of reservation system. Again, these are all tools in the toolbox that we want to apply and be really sensitive when we're thinking about context. So I had the distinct pleasure of working on Acadia's plan. Acadia and Yosemite are not the same place in any way, shape, or form. Acadia's got 68 entrance and egress to their different parklands, so we can't take whatever we design for one park and drop in another. And that's where going through this thoughtful, proactive process in a way that's specific to the park really helps them address the needs that are on the ground in that unit. And that's what we're trying to do through this process. I'll pick up one more on process, and then we'll head into some other topics. But I think on related to our idea of being adaptable and being learning, there was a question about how would we revisit this plan? Could we revisit it regularly to ensure it's being implemented? And I think not necessarily revisiting the whole plan would be a really intensive effort to do on a regular basis. However, we are going to be integrating into this plan a number of what we call indicators and thresholds or monitoring metrics that help us keep track of our desired conditions. How will we know when we've achieved them? How will we know when we're departing from them? And how are we going to respond when we start to see a declining condition? And so we're going to try to pull some of that and put it right into the plan, so we're future-proofing to some extent the plan and really thinking about, if this happens or if we see a trend or a condition changing, how are we going to respond? And so we're really clear about what that future pathway could look like if conditions change during the implementation part of the plan. Okay. We've got a couple more questions on engagement. So I'm going to jump over to Scott for those. There was a question about how much communities outside of Yosemite will have opportunities to access the valley versus the visitors that are coming from like maybe other states or countries. How do we balance equitable access and opportunities to access for a variety of users to the park?
That's great. And that's something that we want to explore. Again, back with our last 3 years of the temporary reservation system, we worked very closely with the gateways on educating people before they came in. Of course, from the 2021 system to the peak hours was different. But again, it's that balancing act, because we know that there's certainly not enough hotels and campgrounds in the park to meet the demand. So the gateways are playing a hugely important role. But at the same time, just having all of these hotels and campgrounds is not the solution. But some of the things that we're doing that are really innovative, for example, there's YARTS with Yosemite Area Regional Transportation System that people can come in on a bus from the gateways. And I know a lot of the gateway hotels are working with them. A lot of the hotels offer tours in their vans and bringing people in. So that's part of it. There's a lot of the CUAs, commercial use authorization holders, that bring people in. So there's a whole there's a whole really range of ways to lessen the impact on the park. And we're certainly working with the gateways. And again, we know that they have a very special place because, physically where they are, and they work very closely with us. But at the same time, it's, as Cicely and we talked about before, it's the equitability and distributing not just experiences, but ways to visit the park are really important. And so we're going to continue to work with the gateways, but focusing on the big picture of making of trying our best to make it world-class experience, protect the park resource, and safe for everybody.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I've got another one for Cicely. Cicely, if you could help us with, I think there's a timing question. So could the concept of peak hour reservations, like we've tried in the past, be applied to times of year? How are we thinking about encouraging people to visit in the fall, visit in the winter, visit in the spring instead of the summer?
That's a great question. Scott would probably tell you that he's been working with the Gateway communities on that for about a decade, on trying to encourage off-season, nothing's really off-season anymore, but less than summer season visitation throughout the year. So that's been an active effort by the park and some of our neighboring communities for some time. Still important, though. It's still a way to spread out visitation without limiting visitation over the course of the year. There was a second part to that question, Rachel, that I think I lost.
The idea about seasonality. How are we thinking about just kind of spreading people out around the year, not just around the day?
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's something that we should evaluate in this plan. Absolutely. I'm guessing we're going to get that suggestion from a number of people, but that might be one of the tools we can use.
Great. And Cicely, while I have you, there was a question also on our elected officials and how they're being involved in this process and if they have a role.
They're closely involved. I'd say both our congressmen and the two senators' staffs are participating in the process, have been briefed on the process. I expect they'll be with us pretty closely throughout the whole thing. Same true goes for local elected officials, and the surrounding communities are quite involved as well.
Okie dokes. Thanks so much, Cicely. We are coming up on our time together and want to be respectful of people's time. And it is such a joy to me that so many people have hung with us for this whole meeting time together to kind of learn about this process and be engaged in it. Again, super appreciative of folks' time and for all these questions. I think we've hit on all of the major themes. I know we didn't get to every question that was on the list. We had a lot of people in here. I hope we hit on most of the major themes that folks were curious about. I did want to take a second and just remind folks that we really do want to hear from you. We have these questions that are on the planning website. Do want to hear from folks on these and encourage folks to get your comments in. If you have time to write us a really long letter that touches on these questions as well as others, we want to hear that. If you only have 10 minutes to jump into the system and jot down some quick thoughts into that form on those questions and other thoughts that you have, we're here for that too. All of that feedback is great feedback, and feedback truly is a gift for us as we embark on this process. So that link is there. I think we've sent it through chat a couple of times for folks. So looking forward to reading those letters. Again, thank you for the time. And I will turn it over to Cicely for any last thoughts as we wrap up.
I just echo Rachel's thanks. Really, thanks for giving us your time tonight. I hope we see you again on our future meetings as we go through this kind of tricky process together. Really appreciate that. If you're calling into a meeting like this, you really care about Yosemite and what happens here. So thank you for that. And we need you. We need you to help us through this this pretty tricky process for the next couple of years. So thanks for being here with us. That's it, Rachel.
Okay, everybody, thanks for coming, and we look forward to reading those letters. We'll see you in the next meeting.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.